Well, it's been a wild couple of weeks for Xbox, and after that recent Phil Spencer interview where he went on XCast, this is over on Kinda Funny Games, their podcast centered around Xbox, the internet kind of exploded around some of the quotes coming out of it. Some of it, yes, out of context, but other parts genuinely concerning and kind of head-scratching at times. And while I did include part of this in Newswave, I really wanted to expand further on it today. So if you guys enjoy the video, make sure you like it and subscribe if you're new here to the SpawnWave channel. So I figured, hey, the person who probably should be talking about this anyway and giving their thoughts on it is the person who apparently hates Xbox. That's what I've, of course, heard at times. And I've also heard that I hate PlayStation, I hate Nintendo, and then I also like all of them. So to me, that means I must be doing this whole thing right. But what we saw the other day from Phil Spencer was interesting in the sense that he had the interview a day or two after Redfall not only came out, but the reviews hit the internet. So I do wonder if he made that interview before reviews went live, because he had mentioned they were kind of caught off guard by the reception for reviewers and also just the general gaming population. I think they were expecting a bit more praise for Redfall, and we're going to come back to that point because that's one of the concerning aspects to this entire thing. But first, Phil Spencer, I've seen people out there saying that he should be pulled from his position, he should lose his job and stuff, and he even mentions and alludes to him seeing this on social media. And the thing with Phil is the Xbox brand in general probably wouldn't exist with the kind of backing it has from Microsoft, if it existed at all, unless he showed up at the time that he did and made the pitch to Satya Nadella to essentially take the entire sector for Xbox in a different direction than where they were attempting to go with the Xbox One, and that being more or less selling the console, the plastic box itself, as their big driving force, right? Compete squarely with Sony and, yes, Nintendo, then, right? Completely on just hardware sales. He had a different vision in mind, and Satya Nadella bought into it, which is obvious because they went out and they bought Mojang. They've also been stacking up other studios, developers, and I mean, most recently, the biggest, I would say, evidence that they have confidence around this 20-year plan, apparently, or this roadmap that they have internally for the next 2 decades, shelling out, or at least attempting to shell out, $70 billion for Activision Blizzard. Even, we'll say, if the deal doesn't go through, the fact that they were willing to put up that kind of capital behind this shows that they are more or less all in on this vision. And I genuinely believe if you remove Phil Spencer from that equation, that there are a lot of uncertainties there within Microsoft. And really, if let's say Phil gets ousted or he gets basically pushed out of there and forced to resign or something because of the situation at Xbox, I think that would be disastrous for the Xbox brand. So essentially, I'm saying Phil Spencer has to remain where he is in order for this thing to really keep rolling, certainly in the position that it is now. But anyway, back to the interview. It's pretty clear that Phil looked frustrated. He looked really annoyed in general. He basically didn't look happy, which is probably the correct thing. I think it would be weird if he showed up and seemed really happy and excited and tried to play up the idea of everything's good, we're fine, don't worry, we're heading into the showcase and Starfield and Forza and all these different things. It's going to be great. He showed up with, just the candor you would certainly not be expecting from someone like that who's trying to market it and build up their overall brand. He showed up ready to talk, we'll say that, and be very straightforward and fire from the hip. So in that case, I do have to give him credit for even doing the interview and showing up, being as really transparent as he could be. But obviously the hot topic then was Redfall, as that had just came out. And when talking about Redfall, there were a lot of things being asked around the quality, the need to push it out there. Why didn't you delay it? And how did you miss this, basically? And some of the answers were, as I mentioned, genuinely concerning here because they believed it would have scored double digits higher. And people say, oh, Metacritic reviews, they don't necessarily matter. They do, obviously, because these companies will run internal reviews to kind of mimic what Metacritic will spit back to them when the game comes out. because the idea of brand recognition and that bar of quality is important in the long run, as Microsoft has kind of shown with some of their more high-profile releases missing the mark, Redfall being the latest one. And that's one of my major concerns that I have here is their ability to understand that bar of quality and notice it, recognize it, see it, before they get to the stage of, okay, the game just has to come out. And I played all the way through Redfall. That's right. I've beaten the game. And I did so in co-op, which did make it much more bearable. If that was single player, I don't think I would have been able to make it to the end. Even just kind of doing the missions and running through the game kind of on the side and listening to podcasts or watching TV shows or something next to it, it would have still been a serious grind to get through that. But with the help of some of the spawn casts and kind of just joking around and going through it that way over the course of a couple of nights, I was able to get through it roughly 10 hours. And the game's just not very good. And that's not taking into account all of the other issues from a technical level, whether it's the AI just being brain dead most of the time, the game crashing, hiccuping, T-pose slides that were happening consistently in the game. It's very obvious. It's just not ready to release. It's unfinished. And if you needed more proof, there's no 60 FPS mode for a first-person shooter on the quote-unquote most powerful system out. Now, he mentions about delays that if they look at a game and understand that it does need more polish or the crashing, or he mentioned crash reports, or a bit higher or severe than they would want it to on release, they will delay it. But again, Redfall very obviously needed more time. He says that, hey, if we delayed it 3 months, the creative vision probably wouldn't have gotten any better. I can agree with that. Redfall, I feel like, is one of Arcane's worst outing, and it just seems like they were uninterested the whole time throughout development, and it's just so uninspired, which is a weird because it's a first-person shooter Far Cry game with vampires. And the funny thing is, if we go from Redfall, which is their full-priced, quote-unquote, AAA, hey, this is going to turn heads kind of release. In fact, it's their first $70 game. Before that, the last release on that scale, right? We're talking, again, the high-profile release was Halo Infinite in 2021. Phil himself says he has other words for 2022 outside of just light. I'm sure there I don't want to say chairs thrown during board meetings, but I'm sure there were there's very colorful language being used during that. But if you go back to Halo Infinite, that was a quality disaster as well. I mean, look, I know the game came out, it got high reviews on Metacritic. I question some of those reviews because if you beat Halo Infinite and you look back on what you played, it was pretty obvious that there were things going on throughout development, as we saw with 343. But also the idea of the game kind of being taped together with that campaign. Yeah, it's very obvious how that was kind of put together in pieces, and at one point you just throw away the entire open world and it turns into another corridor Halo game for the last half of the entire thing, and then the multiplayer with the online was just not ready for release once again. And that's after they delayed it initially from that look that we got during E3, where most people, especially Halo veterans, fans of the series, looked at it and said, what is going on here? It just plays once again into the idea that Microsoft struggles through management, it's all I can assume, to recognize the faults of these games before it's time to show them or even ship them out. And I do see people online mention not to be over dramatic about this kind of stuff or have the kind of commentary that's more critical because, well, Microsoft as a company at large is making a ton of money. Xbox is making billions and millions of dollars. Guys, that should annoy you more that these games that are like their big AAA experiences with Redfall being $70, that should annoy you more that they're coming out in this kind of shape when they are making that kind of money. So Phil Spencer mentions, hey, we're going to reevaluate our process, which is correct. They definitely need to look inward and figure out, I don't know, the chain of command, getting more people involved maybe to manage some of these studios because they've tried to be as hands-off as possible, and that's worked in some cases. Hi-Fi Rush is a great example, but in others, It hasn't with something like Redfall. And you can have 2 or 3, we'll say, good or above average releases, but if you get one that is as bad on release as Redfall that just puts into question the entire brand, you start to work in a net negative trend. And it does also make you wonder, if they're having a hard time managing the studios they have now, is it a good idea for them to pick up Activision Blizzard? Well, I guess the one thing you can say is Activision Blizzard seems capable of running themselves based on what they've been doing. They would be probably the most efficient development studios they would have then, because they get Call of Duty out every single year. So Microsoft, you would assume, could set their clock to that. Okay, every single holiday, we will have a big time release with a new Call of Duty, and occasionally we'll get things like Diablo and Overwatch, those sorts of things. And kind of going back to the whole thing with Xbox and games, there's the phrase Xbox has no games, and that is such obvious hyperbole. They've had titles like Psychonauts 2, Hi-Fi Rush, Pentiment, Grounded, Forza Horizon 5. They were the highest publisher of the year in terms of review scores on Metacritic for 2021, which is great. But then they followed up with 2022, and once again, you start to kind of work in that net negative fashion. They also have this situation with brand recognition, I guess. So they had Master Chief. Great mascot for Xbox. And in fact, you could still look at that and say, okay, that's Xbox's mascot, even though after Halo Infinite, I would say that they have damaged Halo, and it's probably in the worst position I think it's ever been in, which is saying something after the Master Chief Collection release, after Halo 5, after Halo 4. Halo 4 actually wasn't as bad, but like after those releases, we're actually talking about it being in a worse position now after how things have gone for Halo Infinite. So I kind of look around and wonder, what is Xbox's identity, and who would you put up even as the mascot? Like, who's the main character? If I ask people who the main character is of The Legend of Zelda, they'll be like, oh, it's Link. For Mario, well, Mario's right there in the title. You look over at Horizon, well, it's Aloy. Okay, God of War's Kratos. Who's the main character of Psychonauts 2? Most people won't actually know. And it does play into their other highly released games where who's the mascot for Forza Horizon 5, or who's the mascot for Flight Simulator? Like, that's sort of the issue here. Hey, you know what? Hi-Fi Rush, if they want to build on that, maybe they would have brand recognition of the main character there. But that's the biggest thing, is you need an identity for Xbox, and they've kind of struggled to find that since really the Xbox 360 era, when they had at least Gears of War and they had Halo fire on all cylinders. With all that said, I do want to discuss the main thing that Phil Spencer said that really got the internet like into a frenzy, and it has to do with his take on the traditional console race and how Microsoft essentially threw in the towel on it. From Phil Spencer, quote, "We are not in the business of out-consoling Sony or out-consoling Nintendo. There isn't really a great solution or win for us, and I know that will upset a ton of people, but the truth of the matter is that when you're third place in a console marketplace and the top 2 players are as strong as they are, and in certain cases have a discrete focus on doing deals and other things that will make being Xbox hard for us as a team, our vision is everyone on console has a great experience. They feel like a first-class citizen." I see commentary out there, if you just build great games, everything will turn around. It's just not true that if we go off and build great games, all of a sudden you're going to see console share shift in some dramatic way. We lost the worst generation to lose in the Xbox One generation, where everybody built their digital library of games. 90% of the people every year who walk into a retailer to buy a console are already a member of one of the 3 ecosystems. Their digital library is there. And then finally, there is no world where Starfield is an 11 out of 10 and people start selling their PlayStation 5s. That's not going to happen. And I agree with that. Starfield could show up with somehow it gets 102 Metacritic scored. Like the website's confused. There's history is made. Confetti falls from the ceiling. And people probably still wouldn't sell their PlayStation 5 systems because they're looking forward to some game that's coming along, like Spider-Man 2, we'll just say. Or maybe they're playing Fortnite on there with their friends or anything else, right? They're invested in that ecosystem. What they would do, though, most likely, is look into getting access to Starfield. And that could be done through PC with Game Pass, or just buying the game. Could be done through cloud on Game Pass, or they just buy an Xbox. And in fact, that's really what he should be saying here. Isn't necessarily we have to deplete the number of people from PlayStation and fill up Xbox. You just gotta sell Xbox systems or Game Pass subscriptions. That said, I don't really think this was a good thing for Phil to say necessarily, even though in his mind he's trying to explain their position when it comes to the traditional console space. You see kind of the reactions that people have from some of these quotes, and it's pretty obvious that what he was trying to convey didn't necessarily get across, and now people are trying to read between the lines. And part of the art form of PR is being straightforward while also trying to cushion the fall, if you will, for what's being said. Because leading up to this, he even mentioned, hey, this is going to annoy some people. Some people aren't going to be happy with what I'm about to say. And I don't actually think that Phil is saying, hey, we're not going to make good games because there's no point. No, I think he's basically saying we won't be able to catch either Nintendo or Sony in the traditional console race, and we've pivoted to something else completely. And in fact, they actually need more great games than ever in order to hold up Game Pass. He's mentioning one per quarter, like one big game, like I guess what Redfall could have been, or a Forza, or a Gears, or new intellectual properties. And yes, Hi-Fi Rush, I still think would count as that. While it's a quote-unquote AA game or AA level experience, I still think it was really, really fun, and something that adds certainly some variety to their overall library. And I think this entire thing plays into the pitch that he made a long time ago to Satya Nadella to revive Xbox and get a newfound resurgence for the entire thing within Microsoft. And that's that, yes, there are 2 billion gamers out there, as he has mentioned many times before, that is reachable through the cloud, that if you can bypass that plastic box, are available to the business. All right. And cloud gaming is their gamble. It is. It's unproven at this time, and if it ends up working out, it could be a massive pivot for them, and it would actually be impossible for Nintendo or Sony to match them then. They're already built out with the infrastructure through Azure and all of this to take advantage of it. Generally, there's about 250 million people, give or take, who will actually buy a console and take part in the market. And to be honest, that number doesn't really justify the $70 billion purchase that they're looking to make for Activision Blizzard. There has to be something bigger than that, okay? And Sony has also alluded to the idea that they want more than 20 million unit sales from some of their bigger intellectual properties, and that's just because of the rising game costs that are going on. Budgets are out of control right now. Might even do an entire video on that because of some of the newfound information where we're hearing about $500 million budgets behind some of these bigger titles with the marketing included, which is mind-blowing, obviously. But if they're able to reach 2 billion gamers, as he's saying, over like for 20 years from now through the cloud, then that budget that they'd have to put out for some of these larger games would look tiny. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again here. Yes, Game Pass is also still an experiment for the entire marketplace at large. Microsoft clearly is all in on it right now, and that coupled with cloud gaming is how they see the future 20 years from now for gaming evolving, and that would end up being the norm with these subscription services. But it hasn't been a great month or so for Microsoft, and at least going into their showcase next month, they are primed to show off titles, new titles we haven't seen before, updates to ones we have heard of before, and Starfield. So if they can work to finish out this year with releases like Starfield, Forza, maybe Hellblade 2, if not the end of this year to start off 2024, they can rebound and get back on track. But they certainly have a lot of reflection to do internally from the process and development side, and certainly a lofty cadence of releases to achieve to hold up Game Pass. And I'll be curious to see how things turn out, especially with the showcase coming up. But let me know what you guys think about all this down below, and really what kind of advice you would give to Xbox and Phil Spencer after seeing this interview. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.